Recollections of a Late Royal Academician by Charles Lamb. What Apelles was to the Grecian Alexander, the same to the Russian was the late G.D. None but Apelles might attempt the lineaments of the world's conqueror. None but our academician could have done justice to the lines of the Tsar and his courtiers. There they hang, the labor of 10 plodding years in an endless gallery erected for the nonce in the heart of imperial Petersburg, eternal monuments of barbarian taste submitting to half-civilized cunning, 400 fierce half-lengths, all male and all military, like the pit in a French theatre, or the characters in Timon as it was last, acted with never a woman among them. Chaste sitters to Van Dyck, models of grace and womanhood, and thou Dame Venetia Digby, fairest among thy fair compeers at Windsor, hide your pure pale cheeks, and cool English beauties, before this suffocating horde of Scythian riflers, this male chaos. Your cold oaken frames shall wane before the gorgeous buildings. One emperor contended for the monopoly of the ancient, 2 were competitors at once for the pencil of the modern Apelles. The Russian carried it against the Haitian by a single length, and if fate, as it was at one time nearly arranged, had wafted D to the shores of Haiti, with the same complacency in his art, with which he persisted in daubing in day after day, his frozen Muscovites, he would have sate down for life to smutch in upon canvas the faces of blubber-lipped sultanas, or the whole male retinue of the dingy court of Christophe. For in truth a choice of subjects was the least of D's care. A goddess from Cnidus, or from the Kaffir PG 386 coast, was equal to him, Lot or Lot's wife, the charming widow H or her late husband. My acquaintance with D was in the outset of his art, when the graving tools, rather than the pencil, administered to his humble wants. Those implements, as is well known, are not the most favourable to the cultivation of that virtue which is esteemed next to godliness. He might wash his hands in innocency, and so metaphorically approach an altar, but his material puds were anything but fit to be carried to church by an ingrained economy in soap. If it was not for pictorial effect rather, he would wash on Sundays the inner oval, or portrait as it may be termed, of his countenance, leaving the unwashed temples to form a natural black frame round a picture, in which a dead white was the predominant colour, this with the addition of green spectacles made necessary by the impairment which his graving labours by day and night, for he was ordinarily at them for 16 hours out of the 24, had brought upon his visual faculties, gave him a singular appearance, when he took the air abroad, in so much that I have seen a crowd of young men and boys following him along Oxford Street with admiration, not without shouts, even as the youth of Rome, we read in Vasari, followed the steps of Raphael with acclamations for his genius, and for his beauty, when he proceeded from his workshop to chat with cardinals and popes at the Vatican. The family of D were not at this time in affluent circumstances. His father, a clever artist, had outlived the style of art, in which he excelled most of his contemporaries. He, with the father of the celebrated Morland, worked for the shop of Carrington and Bowles, which exists still for the poorer sort of caricatures, on the north side of St. Paul's churchyard. They did clever things in colours. At an inn in Reading a screen is still preserved, full of their labours, but the separate portions of either artist are now undistinguishable. I remember a mother teaching her child to read Barton has a copy of it, a laundress washing, a young Quaker, a beautiful subject. But the flower of their forgotten productions hangs still at a public house on the left hand, as thou arrivest, reader, from the now Highgate archway, at the foot of the descent where Crouch End begins, on thy road to Green Hornsey, turn in and look at it, for the sight is well worth a cup of excusatory cider. In the parlour to the right UPG 387 will find it, an antiquated subject, a damsel sitting at her breakfast table in a gown of the flowered chintz of our grandmothers, with a tea service before her of the same pattern. The effect is most delicate. Why have these harmonies, these agraments, no place in the works of modern art? With such niceties in his calling, D did not much trouble his head, but, after an ineffectual experiment to reconcile his eyesight with his occupation, boldly quitted it, and dashed into the beaten road of commonplace portraiture in oil. The Hopners and the Lawrences were his Van Dycks and his Velasquezes, and if he could make anything like them, he ensured himself immortality. With such guides he struggled on through laborious nights and days, till he reached the eminence he aimed at, of mediocrity. Having gained that summit, he sate down contented, if the features were but cognizable, no matter whether the flesh resembled flesh or oilskin. For the thousand tints, the grains which in life diversify the nose, the chin, the cheek, which a Reynolds can but coarsely counterfeit, he cared nothing at all about them. He left such scrupulosities to opticians and anatomists. If the features were but there, the character of course could not be far off. a lucky hit which he made in painting the dress of a very dressy lady, Mrs. W. E., whose handsome countenance also and tall elegance of shape were too palpable entirely to escape under any mask of oil, with which even D. could overlay them, brought to him at once an influx of sitters which almost rivaled the importunate calls upon Sir Thomas. A portrait he did soon after of the Princess Charlotte clenched his fame. He proceeded academician. At that memorable conjuncture of time, it pleased the Allied sovereigns to visit England. I called upon D. to congratulate him upon a crisis so doubly eventful. His pleasant housekeeper seemed embarrassed, owned that her master was alone. But could he be spoken with? With some importunity I prevailed upon her to usher me up into his painting room. It was in Newman Street. At his easel stood D., with an immense spread of canvas before him, and by his side a live goose. I inquired into this extraordinary combination. Under the rose he informed me that he had undertaken to paint a transparency for Vauxhall, against an expected visit of the Allied sovereigns to that place. I smiled at an engagement PG 388 so derogatory to his newborn honours, but a contempt of small gains was never one of D's foibles. My eyes beheld crude forms of warriors, kings, rising under his brush upon this interminable stretch of cloth. The Wolga, the Don and the Dnieper were there or their representative river guards, and Father Thames clubbed urns with the Vistula. Glory with her dazzling eagle was not absent, nor fame nor victory. The shade of Rubens might have evoked the mighty allegories, but what was the goose? He was evidently sitting for a something. D at last informed me that having fixed upon a group of rivers he could not introduce the Royal Thames without his swans, that he had inquired the price of a live swan, and it being more than he was prepared to give for it, he had bargained with the poulterer for the next thing to it, adding significantly that it would do to roast after it had served its turn to paint swans by. Reader, this is a true story. So entirely devoid of imagination or any feeling for his high art was this painter, that for the few historical pictures he attempted, any sitter might sit for any character. He took once for a subject the infant Hercules. Did he choose for a model some robust antique? No, he did not even pilfer from Sir Joshua, who was nearer to his own size, but from a show he hired to sit to him a child in years indeed, though no infant, but in fact a precocious man or human portent that was disgustingly exhibiting at that period, a thing to be strangled. From this he formed his infant Hercules. In a scriptural flight he next attempted a Samson in the lap of Dalila. A Dalila of some sort was procurable for love or money, but who should stand for the Jewish Hercules? He hired a tolerably stout porter with a thickish head of hair, curling in yellowish locks but lithe, much like a wig, and these were the robust strengths of Samson. I once was a witness to a family scene in his painting closet, which I had entered rather abruptly, and but for his encouragement should as hastily have retreated. He stood with displeased looks eyeing a female relative, whom I had known under happier auspices, that was kneeling at his feet with a baby in her arms, with her eyes uplifted and suppliant. Though I could have previously sworn to the virtue of Miss, yet casual slips have been known. There are such things as families disgraced, where least you would have PG 389 expected it. The child might be, I had heard of no wedding. I was the last person to pry into family secrets, when D. relieved my uneasy cogitations by explaining that the innocent, good-humoured creature before me, such as she ever was, and is now that she is married with a baby borrowed from the public house, was acting Andromache to his Ulysses, for the purpose of transferring upon canvas a tender situation from the Troads of Seneca. On a subsequent occasion I knocked at D's door. I had chanced to have been in a dreamy humour previously. I am not one that often poetizes, but I had been musing, coxcombically enough in the heart of Newman Street, Oxford Road, upon Pindus and the Ionian maids. The lover of Daphne was in my mind, when, answering to my summons, the door opened, and there stood before me, laurel-crowned, the god himself, unshorn Apollo. I was beginning to mutter apologies to the celestial presence, when on the thumb of the right hand of the Delian, his left held the harp, I spied a palette such as painters carry, which immediately reconciled me to the whimsical transformation of my old acquaintance, with his own face, certainly any other than Grecianesque, into a temporary image of the oracle-giver of Delphos. To have impersonated the Ithacan was little. He had been just sitting for a guard. It would be no incurious enquiry to ascertain what the minimum of the faculty of imagination, ever supposed essential to painters along with poets, is that, in these days of complaints of want of patronage towards the fine arts, suffices to dub a man or R.L.A.N. Not only had D no imagination to guide him in the treatment of such subjects, but he had no relish for high art in the productions of the great masters. He turned away from them as from something foreign and irrelative to him and his calling. He knew he had neither part nor portion in them. Cousin him into the Stafford or the Angerstein Gallery, he involuntarily turned away from the Baths of Diana, the Four Ages of Guercino, the Lazarus of Piombo, to some petty piece of modern art that had been inconsistently thrust into the collection through favour. On that he would dwell and pore, blind as the dead to the delicacies that surrounded him. There he might learn something, there he might pilfer a little. There was no grappling with Titian or Angelo. Pg 390. The narrowness of his domestic habits to the very last was the consequence of his hard bringing up and unexpected emergence into opulence. While rolling up to the ears in Russian roubles, a penny was still in his eyes the same important thing, which it had with some reason seemed to be, when a few shillings were his daily earnings. When he visited England a short time before his death, he reminded an artist of a commission which he had executed for him in Russia, the package of which was still unpaid. At this time he was not unreasonably supposed to have realized a sum little short of 500,000 sterling. What became of it was never known. What gulf or what Arctic virago sucked it in, his acquaintance in those parts have better means of guessing than his countrymen. It is certain that few of the latter were anything the better for it. It was before he expatriated himself, but subsequently to his acquisition of pictorial honours in this country, that he brought home 2 of his brother academicians to dine with him. He had given no orders extraordinary to his housekeeper. He trusted, as he always did, to her providing. She was a shrewd lass, and knew, as we say, a bit of her master's mind. It had happened that on the day before, passing near Clare Market by one of those open shambles, where tripe and cowheel are exposed for sale, his eye was arrested by the sight of some tempting flesh rolled up. It is a part of the intestines of some animal, which my olfactory sensibilities never permitted me to stay long enough to inquire the name of. Marked the curious involutions of the unacquainted luxury, the harmony of its colours, a sable vert, pleased his eye, and, warmed with the prospect of a new flavour, for a few farthings he bore it off in triumph to his housekeeper. It so happened that his day's dinner was provided, so the cooking of the novelty was for that time necessarily suspended. Next day came, the hour of dinner approached. His visitors, with no very romantic anticipations, expected a plain meal at least. They were prepared for no new dainties, when, to the astonishment of them and almost of D himself, the purchase of the preceding day was served up piping hot, the cook declaring that she did not know well what it was, for her master always marketed. His PG 391 guests were not so happy in their ignorance. They kept dogs. I will do D the justice to say that on such occasions he took what happened in the best humour possible. He had no false modesty, though I have generally observed that persons who are quite deficient in that mauvaise honte are seldom overtroubled with the quality itself, of which it is the counterfeit. By what arts with his pretensions D contrived to wriggle himself into a seat in the Academy, I am not acquainted enough with the intrigues of that body, more involved than those of an Italian conclave, to pronounce. It is certain that neither for love to him, nor out of any respect to his talents, did they elect him. Individually he was obnoxious to them all. I have heard that, in his passion for attaining this object, he went so far as to go down upon his knees to some of the members, whom he thought least favourable, and beg their suffrage with many tears. But death, which extends the measure of a man's stature to appearance, and wealth, which men worship in life and death, which makes giants of punies and embalms insignificance, called around the exequies of this pygmy painter the rank, the riches, the fashion of the world. By academic hands his pole was borne, by the carriages of nobles of the land and of ambassadors from foreign powers his bier was followed, and St. Paul's, O worthy casket for the shrine of such as Euxis, now holds all that was mortal of Gede.